So we talked about all the, I hope you're all back. We talked about the different steps that you should consider when reconstructing an argument. And we've applied that to a couple of examples, some from the book, some from previous exams, as I've used them in this course. And there are a couple of things that you need to consider when reconstructing an argument. That has to do with your goal when making a reconstruction of an argument. And in the book, they talk about the principle of charity, and they say that, well, if you're interested in the truth, you should give the best possible interpretation of the argument always. But they also indicate in that chapter, and that's something we should bear in mind, that we should come up with that best interpretation within the framework of what somebody was actually saying, or what we can expect that somebody intended to say or imply in that specific context. Because we want you to train to be good in scientific reasoning. We want you to apply these skills when writing your own research report, as we're training you in another course. So it makes sense to also focus on what can we actually derive from what somebody has actually written down, and not necessarily what's the best possible argument that we can think of. So we need to balance that principle of charity, giving the best possible interpretation to what somebody said or writes, with the principles of completeness and parsimony when reconstructing an argument. Let's talk about completeness first. These are not things I'm going to test you on, but these are three principles to keep in the back of your head when considering, should I leave this out? Should I include it? Should I include a bunch of implicit premises and make them explicit in my reconstruction or not? Then these three principles should help you decide what to do. First is completeness, right? So one thing to check, and we did that with a couple of the examples we just talked about, is whether one step for checking completeness, did you put everything in that should be in the argument, is checking whether all terms that return in the conclusion, in this case Socrates is mortal, whether those terms are all present in the different premises as well. And if that's the case, the second step is to check whether the premises actually have a proper connection. So are the premises connected to the conclusion, and are the premises connected to each other? If you have written a reconstruction and you check for completeness and you see that it's incomplete, then you have a decision to make. You should either decide, well, given the context of what's being written, I think that what the author intended was this implicit connecting premises, and I'm going to make it explicit to make sure that a proper connection is there between the premises and the conclusion. Or if you think, given the context, well, a person just made an error and he gave me an invalid argument, so there's no proper connection with the conclusion, you should just represent it or reconstruct this as such, as an invalid argument. What helps with this is the stuff we're going to talk about on Tuesday. So recognizing different forms of improper reasoning, forms of pseudo-reasoning. Those are all examples that are common, right? So common ways in which people make errors in their reasoning. So that helps you in how to reconstruct an argument, if you recognize it as a formal fallacy or as a substantive argument, substantive fallacy. All right, so check for completeness, check whether any connections are missing, and consider whether you should make those connections explicit. So do you think that the author implied that connection? And you can also just try it out, right? So you could also say, I don't know whether the author intended to say that if something is unnatural, it's immoral, but I'm going to put it in just to make the argument valid, and then I'm just going to check whether that second premise indeed holds, right? The example we just talked about. So it's also something that you can just try out. I'm going to make it complete, but I can only make it complete by adding a premise, a connecting premise, which is false, basically. So it does make it valid, but it still makes it unsound. All right, that so far as completeness is concerned. To show you what I mean with the principle of parsimony, let's look at the following. So if I were to give you the following text, Jan reacts more quickly to aggression-related words than other words. So from this, we can conclude that aggression-related words are more accessible in Jan's associative network. Followed by the reason why aggression-related words are more accessible is because Jan very often plays Fortnite. His mother never let him play war games, so that made him play a lot of games. Jan is a chill vlogger, and his fish is called Jan Junior. So potentially, if you're interpreting this argument, what I would like you to see is that the stuff that isn't in bold is the argumentative part of what's being said here, and the rest is just explanations or not relevant. Of course, you could reconstruct it as an argument that includes the stuff about his fish being called Jan Junior, which would somehow lead to the conclusion that aggression-related words are more accessible in Jan's associative memory. But then you would have to construct it. That's something that, as Tobias mentioned it during the break, that's completely out there, right? We have to make some implicit assumptions explicit that, I mean, that's basically us thinking up stuff, right? So a fish is a pet. Jan named his fish himself. If somebody names a pet after themselves, then the person is probably self-centered. So therefore he's self-centered. If he's self-centered, then he's aggressive. Aggressive people have more accessible, la la la. So that's the conclusion. So we managed to connect the stuff about the name of his pet to the stuff about aggression, but it's become something that isn't true to the original text. Right? So we have to make so many assumptions, then we're being overly charitable, right? Or overly charitable. You could say I've made a connection between premise one and the conclusion, but at the cost of some dubious assumptions. So we need to be parsimonious. So we need to give preference to the interpretation of the argument that includes the least assumptions on our part. So if in doubt, should I reconstruct this as with all these assumptions or with some less assumptions? Your preference should go to the more strict interpretation. All right, so you apply these three principles. We try to when in doubt, we try to give our best interpretation of what somebody's saying, right? So it could either be a bad argument or a good explanation. So you should be charitable and interpret it as being an intended explanation. You should try to be complete in your reconstruction. So is there a way for me to decipher what somebody's trying to say in such a way that there's an actual proper connection between the premises and the conclusion, either a valid or a forceful connection? But we should also be parsimonious in our reconstruction. So we shouldn't make any undue assumptions just to make that connection between the premises and the conclusion. So it's a bit of a balancing act that can be somewhat frustrating, right? So you prefer questions that only have a yes or no answer. That's correct and that's incorrect. Often when you encounter arguments in the wild, as it were, in real life, that's an act of interpretation. So you have to, I can tell you which interpretation is correct all the time. That depends on your assumptions in the context. And I can tell you to bear these principles in mind when making that interpretation. All right, so let's make a final application before we're going to talk about assessment. So this is the example from the book. We started out with this, right? And I told you that all the stuff in red was just stage setting and rhetorical, so we should exclude that from the reconstruction. Then we should do some logical streamlining, which we just talked about, right? So reconstruct the stuff that's being said in the text as clear if-then statements or disjunctions. So if we reconstruct what's being said here, the stuff in yellowy orange, I don't know how it comes across on your screen, but I'm in doubt. What the person here is trying to argue is that we should reintroduce compulsory military service. And the reason why that should be reintroduced is that it would solve a specific problem. That's what we can derive from that context, that what we can derive from the part in red, the rhetorical part, that importance that he was trying to stress without using arguments, is that, well, basically youth is going to, they're misbehaving, right? They're acting like hooligans and they're doing bad things. They're scales and they're acting like hooligans, and we need to solve that. And the way in which we can solve that is by, sending them to the military for military service. The way in which they're trying to show that is by showing that if it's worthwhile to reintroduce military service, because if they would acquire those habits, that would be a good solution for the problem, right? So if they would acquire habits of discipline and community spirit, then the problem that we're trying to deal with of drunkenness and hooliganism would be reduced. So if they were to made to perform military service, British youth would acquire habits of discipline and community spirit. So we made something that wasn't that explicit in the written text, more explicit, and we've indicated that that's actually a chain of different conditional statements, right? And therefore we can conclude, which is left implicit in the original argument, that if people were to perform military service, that would result in less drunkenness and hooliganism because they acquire discipline and community spirit in the military. Right, so basically, do not be confused by the example, but what we did here is logical streamlining. We made explicit from the original text what was intended by using if-then statements. Right? That's the takeaway here. What we could then do, or what we already did in part, is make interim conclusions explicit. Right, so what they're saying actually here in the actual text, we've used the part in yellow when we used the part in green, but we haven't done anything with the purple part, because what the author is trying to argue is not just that military service would result in less drunkenness and hooliganism. No, what the author is trying to argue is that we should reintroduce military service, right? And the reason the reason he gives us why we should introduce it is related to the effects of military service that he's arguing about here, but that's just part of the argument. So we've taken P1, P2 and the conclusion, and we put that at the top here. So it still says the same as the stuff you were just looking at, but we've included the stuff in purple as well from the original argument. So they're arguing if they would acquire certain habits, then the problem would be solved. If they were made to perform military service, then they would acquire those habits. So military service would lead to a solution for that problem. And then it includes an assumption. So Britain should reduce drunkenness and hooliganism, right? Which wasn't part of the original reconstruction, but the author is clearly assuming that that is a worthwhile goal that we should strive towards. So if we were so inclined, if we think that we should reduce drunkenness and hooliganism, then we should also think that we should reintroduce compulsory military service for Britain's youth. Again, the takeaway here is not specifically related to the contents of the example. I just tried to show you what we did. So we tried to logically streamline, which means reconstructing in a way that makes the intended logical structure more explicit by using if-then statements and making interim conclusions explicit. Which brings me to the final remark about reconstruction. This is a type of argument. So going from a statement about that something is the case to a conclusion that something should be done, which is part of practical reasoning. Practical reasoning is a fancy word for saying that sometimes people are trying to argue that we should do something. Such and such is the best course of action. Such and such is the best course of action, which we call practical reasoning. And as the book mentions, there's two things you should watch out for if you're assessing an argument, reconstructing and assessing an argument that includes a conclusion about something that we should do. So a form of practical reasoning. Which is basically two things which are very intuitive, right? So do the benefits of performing the action outweigh the costs? So somebody says that we should introduce military service, which has certain benefits, but it also has certain costs. So tell me about the costs first before I can make a proper cost-benefit analysis and say that it indeed is worthwhile to perform that analysis. But also, if it leads to a certain benefit, I don't know whether you guys can still see me. For the people on the stream, it seems like my connection to Zoom was lost. Yeah, for the people still seeing me in stream, I'm trying to reconnect with Zoom because I was thrown out. And I hope I can take it from there again. I don't know what happened. I didn't get a warning or anything, but... Hi! There I am again. I hope you managed to hear most of what I was saying. I don't know what happened. I just disappeared from the meeting. Maybe somebody got fed up with my long sentences and threw me out. All right, so somebody's trying to do some practical reasoning, trying to argue that we should act in such and such way or decide in such and such way. And basically, when people are trying to argue that, what they are trying to do is what you should look out for is a cost-benefit analysis actually being offered, are not just the benefits mentioned, but are also the cost weighed in. And is there another way to go that would result in the same or in more benefits and less costs? And that's something you should consider as well. So when recognizing practical reasoning, please consider both. And if we're talking about courses of action that involve uncertainty, which is most of the stuff that you might encounter, then you should make a proper expectancy value calculation, right? Or utility expectancy calculation, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago. So for the military service, that might look like a breakdown. We should introduce military service or not, or we should do something else. And what are the considerations? Well, drunkenness is something that has a low utility, and to what extent we expect that to be the case if we introduce military service, but also if we don't introduce military service but do something else. And of course, there are other considerations beyond drunkenness and hooliganism that weren't considered here. The same way you can think about other examples, right? So you might have encountered the example here, it's in Dutch, I'm sorry, but the basically the boss of the university you're enrolled in said that, well, there are a lot of benefits to teaching on campus, so shouldn't we make on-campus teaching for tutorials up to 30 students available or allowed in the Netherlands? And then you should recognize, well, she's proposing a course of action. This is a form of practical reasoning, so I should draw out my different possibilities and utility expectation sheet and think about her considerations, better learning, but also the implications for spreading COVID-19 and also different social effects, right? So she makes a comparison between students at university and people in high school. And well, people in high school are more reliant on their parents and their families when they're actually at home and not in school. So that there's different effects to consider as well, which go beyond just the effects on COVID and learning of the students involved, but have other social implications that perhaps you should consider as well in this form of practical reasoning. And it even applies, and that might be confusing to some people, but we'll pick this up in the second block, to your average null hypothesis significance testing, which actually is a form of practical reasoning. You're not really concluding that the null hypothesis is true. No, what you're saying is that it's a proper course of action for you to reject the null hypothesis given these assumptions, which is a weird way of reasoning in science, and I hope you have that intuition that can be considered weird, but we'll return to that in the second block. But I would consider this a form of practical reasoning.